Hello, my name is Slusher. This is my commentary version of my team's clear of another Savage Mount Rokkon. Um, I will also upload the non-edited version with just the game sounds and comms. But I feel like when you search for Savage Criterion content, that's the only thing that's available. There really isn't anything outside of that. So I wanted to do something different, and I also wanted to comment a little bit on the differences between Savage and normal, because outside of the very little information you can find on the wiki, and even some not that great information, like with regards to the miasma, um, there just isn't a lot out there. You don't really need it. Savage is mostly normal. Other than that, you can't mess up mechanics because a lot of ones that are non-lethal on normal are lethal on Savage. The other issue is that the miasma, if you read it on the wiki, it sounds like a soft enrage, and this actually costed us a clear on Sildun when we were trying to learn that way back when. We learned the hard way that the miasma is actually a hard enrage, and back then there was no timer. That was a later patch where they added putting the timer up on the duty information. Previously, it was just it gave you a 1 minute warning, and it was 24 minutes, but you didn't know that until you had actually gotten there. Anyhow, yeah, those are just kind of my reasons. So first thing I wanted to talk about is for Black Mage specifically, Crit Black Mage versus Spell Speed Black Mage. When I first started progging Rokkon, I had best in slot for Spell Speed Black Mage, but I did not have best in slot for Crit Black Mage. And over the course of our prog, I transitioned from playing Spell Speed Black Mage to Crit Black Mage. I think in the end, knowing what I know now, I probably would prefer to play Spell Speed Black Mage for trying to get my first clear. But that comes in disagreement with my tank, and the reasoning for that is something you'll learn if you haven't done Savage before, for Criterion specifically, is that the trash really is the road bump. The bosses are mostly the same, just that you can't... mistakes that are bad but don't really matter that much in the end will just kill you in Savage, and since you can't res in Savage, the run is over. So that you have to play well on the bosses, but you can play exactly the same on the bosses, as opposed to the trash is it's just a new prog thing. It's completely different. It hits so hard on Savage. It's just a completely different beast. And so the reason why this Black Mage, Crit Black Mage matters is when you crit a Xenoglossy on a boss, that's not going to speed up your kill time by a meaningful margin. But when you crit a Xenoglossy on a trash ad, you're taking like 10% of their health. So my tank really wanted me to play crit because for him, it just made it a lot easier when sometimes randomly a trash pack, the mobs would just die like 3 or 4 seconds earlier. And the way the trash hits in Savage, trust me, that's a big deal. The other thing, I don't know how much are we into the dungeons. It's still 2 minutes before the dungeon starts. The other thing I want to mention real quick is the rewards. I know a lot of people give Criterion crap for rewards, and I don't necessarily disagree with them, but it bothers me a little bit because I think, first of all, I think the Criterion content is some of the best content they've added during Endwalker. And then the second thing is, I feel like there's a missed lesson here. When we had the whole WoW refugee thing, myself being one of them, one of the big things they talked about is how WoW forces you to do things that you don't want to do, like doing dailies every day or doing Torghast, which was just not very fun at all, but you were miles behind if you didn't do it. I feel like there's a lesson here that's lost on the people asking for rewards for Criterion. Criterion Savage is not for everyone. And so, I don't know. I understand, and yeah, it does suck that we finished this and I really didn't want any of the rewards, but I don't know. But I feel like it's not the end of the world that doesn't have anything. The accomplishment itself is actually, and the challenge is really fun, and that did enough for me. Okay, so I did want to talk about something on this poll specifically. The thing I want to talk about is potting versus not potting. So I had I went back and forth a lot for whether or not potting this first poll here is good or not. Like I mentioned earlier with the miasma, and you can see the timer up here in the corner. In 24 minutes-ish, the dungeon's going to hard enrage. And so you aren't really fighting the enrage of any particular boss. You're fighting the enrage of the entire dungeon. So when you consider it like that, then the thought process has to be, you know, am I losing or gaining a use? And potting on this pack absolutely gains a use. Now, I have found that the difference in kill speed of this pack does not matter that much, or doesn't change that much, whether I pot or not. It's pretty minuscule, actually. I think it's kind of like the opposite of the Xenoglossia effect I talked about before, where raising your DPS in such a way on something with a low health pool doesn't seem to matter that much. I don't know. Maybe that's like just an untruth. But in any case, using a pot there definitely gains you a use of a pot over the course of the entire dungeon. So since you're fighting the enrage of the dungeon, I personally landed on the side of using it. But there's two things here. The first thing is, I don't think that it improves that specific trash pack that much. And then the second thing is, the way our prog worked, as soon as we started clearing the second set of trash with consistency, we basically went directly into a clear. It was the last two bosses we were pretty practiced on, and so it was maybe like, it was less than 10 times that we got past the second trash until we pulled. So my potting in the second half of the dungeon, I didn't really have time to like get a feel for when the right times were. And so in the end, I end up wasting this pot because my pot timings in the second half of the dungeon are really bad. And I'll point them out, I guess, but you might even just notice them yourself. And the reasoning is just, we didn't have to do the second half of the dungeon very many times. It was maybe like 5 times tops. It was really low. The second track really was the roadblock. And once we learned that, we were fine. Here, you'll notice my amplifier is off of cooldown. That was another thing that happened, similar to the pot, where originally I was using amplifier on this big guy, but I stopped doing it because it didn't increase the kill speed on him that much. But the main reason why I stopped doing it was if you use amplifier there on him, when it comes back up again during this fight, was really bad in a way that it was forcing me to use a Xenoglossia in the middle of fire phase in order to not overcap. And it was just really is messy. I would either have to use a swift cast to not drop a Nokian, or I would have to just get lucky, like when you're it's the part with the stacks and spreads. I'll point it out later. But you would just have to get a lucky pattern where you could get to the spot fast enough, or you would have to blow a swift cast that you don't really want to use. Because I try to pull everything for the cloud stripes. As just a small example, here is a situation where this movement, when you go to the middle here, is a lot easier with spell speed. Sometimes I end up having to use a Fire 3 if I don't like instantly move when it's time. Or, well, blow a Fire Starter, not broadcast Fire 3. Yeah. So typically I save my Addle for this AoE because the tank and the healer have a lot of stuff up for the first one, so it's pretty well mitted anyway. And then this is the stack spread here. Now, right here, when I'm going to the first stack, is when Amplifier comes up. If I had used it on the main, like the middle guy during the trash. And so I'm in the middle of fire phase here, and it's just really difficult to use it without overcapping. And so that's why I ended up drifting that fire starter, or sorry, amplifier in the end. It just felt like the right choice. This is the hardest, or this is just the most annoying part of the fight as Black Mage. One thing I'll mention here, since I'm gonna be talking about how much I love spell speed so much, is that this is the one mechanic where unintuitively spell speed is worse. Uh, it makes sense when you think about it, but it's kind of unintuitive, which is that because you have spell speed, your global is faster, and your triple cast goes away faster. So having the crit build means that your triple cast is going to last longer, which is just nice because it lasts the entire phase. I guess another thing I'll mention here, I just saw it happen there. There's some cringe DPS choices by me in this run. The mindset here is the night before, this is actually an extra day. We normally would have been done with prog for the week. But we were playing really well, and we had a 4% wipe in which I was the only one alive for like the last 15 seconds. The boss was alive, and if literally anyone else was alive, we would have killed the boss. And so for that reason, my mindset going into... We got it down to 4% in that situation where I was the only one alive. And so my mindset going into this run, or this day of clear attempts, and this was actually our first clear attempt of the day, was that I didn't really need to do a lot of damage for us to clear. I just needed to not take any damage downs and to not die, obviously, since in Savage, dying ends the run. So just playing safe at the cost of damage was my mindset, because I had already seen that we weren't anywhere close to hitting the dungeon in rage. So I was just playing like super safe, even if it was super cringe. And so there are a couple of times when I'm skipping Despair just to start moving, or I'm clipping my GCD to get a swift cast up so I can start moving, and it's for that reason. I just knew that I could play safe and we'd still hit the dungeon in rage, and so that was the purpose of why I did that. I personally really hate this mechanic. So my goal when we do this is to skip it. Which you can't really do on Savage, but you can not have to do the whole thing like that. That was another part of the reason why I moved the amplifier, was that little bit of damage, getting extra Xeno on the boss. Maybe I don't have to deal with that thick strike mechanic as much as possible. Okay, this part here I actually think is very interesting. Like I mentioned before, when you do Savage, you're going to find that the trash is the hump mechanic. So when you first get to this, you're gonna think, because it seems logical, that the sprites are tracking, but they are not. They are actually 100% scripted. And getting used to your party's damage is a good thing as far as like knowing where to move them or where to be. Originally, what I would do is during the look away, I would get caught in the corner in a spot where either stepping into a stripe or looking at the boss were my only options. So basically I would kill myself. Here's another Enochian drop. This one was actually because I thought my Despair was the killing blow. I was casting Despair, and I 100% thought that it was the killing blow in my head, because I was already preparing mentally for this mob. And so I just didn't even notice that I needed to maintain Enochian. I thought I had like 15 seconds. So this particular trash mob on Savage, it's highly recommended that you pop your 2 minutes for. The Huton cast here makes him cast several on telegraphed AoEs very quickly that do one-shot, and it's just better just not to deal with it. I've noticed in other clear videos that I've watched that that's a common... People will use their 2 minutes to try to kill that thing before it goes into its dangerous phase. So again, here, this pull to the middle is scripted. We're doing this because of we know where the sprites typically are during our normal kill speed. And so we're pulling them here to make sure that we have a lot of room to deal with that first mechanic. Because that one closes off certain sides of the mob, you want to have access to all four sides. There, I almost trapped myself in the corner with the look away again. But we're fine. I think the first boss is probably the most challenging on Savage. I think this boss is fairly easy. The only problem with this boss is that, oh, here's my pot. See, I've realized, oh, I haven't potted since the first boss. I should really pot. And I did it after using one Xeno and Lightning. I should have popped it as I was running so that it was on my Thunder and on all of my Xenos. Yeah, so this is just, again, that's just because I hadn't really mapped this boss out at all as far as like what cooldowns I typically will have available when we get past the trash. Because we killed it in like the 4th or 5th time after we got through the trash. I'm gonna be big safety gaming here. Normally I would never use a triple cast during ice phase, but it just felt like there was, I don't know, it's the best spot. It's the most movement. There's another movement come up here, but it's really easy because you can use your swift cast for that. I'm always saving this polyglot here to polyglot into the swift cast and then use one spell to get to the safe spot. Yeah, so what I was talking about before I talked about the pot thing was, oh, this is another spot where I Blizzard 3 early because I messed up my movement. But this movement is typically very easy. Actually, that's just a mistake by me. You can definitely get there without using a triple cast or without slide casting. Just using the one swift cast and still maintain your full fire phase. That's just, I made a mistake somewhere. So this boss on normal doesn't have enough health to force you to do all their mechanics. And so that's the one hard part. I'll talk a little more when we get there. One thing I want to talk about here is, the thing we realized here is that the second towers come out before the tethers go out. So you can just stay in the tether bait spot until the towers appear, and then you can just bait right on top of your tower to minimize movement, which is cool. It makes it a lot easier. Once we started doing that, we had zero problems with this phase ever. I think that's really the only thing I have. I can finally talk about the thing I was trying to talk about. So the second version of that, the second set of towers, is the mechanic that typically on the Criterion normal, you will kill him as he's charging up or even before that. And so what we did is we went into normal and would sandbag damage to get to that phase, and then just practice it. And then either not kill him or only kill him if we did it successfully. Here we're going to use a downtime strat. Again, it goes back to what we talked about with us having the 4% wipe the day before. We weren't really worried about damage, but the samurai and the warrior can skirt to the left there. It's very tight because you have to like dodge between the Exa that starts in the cross pattern in the middle. But again, we knew we were ahead on damage, so we weren't taking any risks like that at all. Alright, so we're gonna come back in here and then he's gonna do some like tank stuff. But after that is when the second tower's mechanic starts. So the trick to this that I'll mention is if you look at the debuffs on your party list, if you look at the two on the far left, if they're the same color, that's one thing that it can be, and if they're a different color, that's another thing that it could be. So here you can see me and Drogana both have not the same color on the far left, and Daki and Ahsoka have the same color on the left. So that means that those people are partners. Now, since I'm across from Daki, we have to do a cross formation here. But that's the only thing you really need to check for this, is just to make sure you know who needs to be working with whose towers. It can be, obviously, everyone can have the same color, everyone can have the different color, and those are easy, because then your formation doesn't matter at all. But if two people have one and two people have the other, then you need to make sure that you use those person's towers. And so we would call out who my partner was, and then we would decide if we needed to cross or go straight through. This is a really bad pot here. Again, this goes back to I hadn't really thought it through. I should have held this pot for sure. Because he's done doing anything dangerous. He's just gonna raid wide. He does after that he does the first mechanic over again, which is pretty easy. And then he just does some raid wides until he enrages. So potting there was kind of a waste. Also, I didn't really have the resources to fully use it. Whereas here, I could have done a quadruple Xenoglossy under pot as an opener, had I known, or had I not used my pot. So that was a really bad pot. I think in the future, if I was going to clear this a second time, without having any other time to experiment, if I was just going for a clear run right away, I would probably pot as I was running to the second boss, and then I would use my third pot, or actually no, because there's one on the I used the very first trash, then during Cloud Stripes on the first boss, then I would do, as I'm running to the second boss, I would pot right before I Thunder, and then I would have potted here at the opener, and then you get another pot at the end, which you don't really need, but if someone takes like a damage on a Zero Auspice, which no one does in this run, so our strat on a Zero Auspice is to Giga Mitt, so that it doesn't kill anyone, because it's probably the hardest to dodge mechanic in this fight. But even if that happens, you still get a damage down, so then the pot would probably come in handy there. One thing, well, I'll mention it later. So this first mechanic this guy does is pretty intimidating. This is maybe something normal Criterion Guide-ish, but I'll mention it anyway. The best thing to do is not so much worry about mapping everything. That's what we were trying to do at the start. It would be like north, out, east, in, stuff like that. The best thing to do is just keep track of the direction. So when you see the thing, go to the first spot. So go to his right and in here. And then just go out and to the left. Or that's out and behind. And then out and ahead. Or out and to the left. Okay, I read that really badly. But you get the idea. We were trying to track it, like literally the map positions. And that made it like take a lot of thought and be really it just wasn't as good. Doing it this way, it makes it so much easier. So we're going out and forward and then in and to the right. And just thinking of it like this, one step at a time, makes it pretty easy. It seems intimidating at first, but I actually saw that strategy of calling it that way, because we were literally just doing out at A, in at B, and that took a lot of brain power just to make those calls, and it relieves a lot of the intimidation factor if you just think of it that way. I stole that from a clear video I watched. I don't really have a whole lot to say about this boss. I guess I can say is I had some fears about this boss. My fear being that I was worried that this boss would give us problems with Enrage before we had ever gotten here on Savage, because on normal he was the closest to Enrage that we would get. Like both the Rat and the Tiger, we would skip mechanics, and this boss, we typically would not skip mechanics. But I think in the course of learning, we just got good enough where we stopped getting damage downs. And we don't get a damage down. He has a small health pool to account for the fact that he goes untargetable. he actually dies pretty fast. One thing I want to mention here is I split my cooldowns here. Because he goes untargetable, I don't want to have any Xenos when he goes away, so I try to dump all of my Xenos. But I save ley lines for the next thing, because I think it's hard to get full duration on your ley lines there. And you do get most of your polyglots back anyway, so splitting up's not that bad. Also, we have a samurai, so the only buff is chain. So it's not the end of the world if I'm disaligned, so that's just one thing about what I do there. Also, there's a really cool ley lines here. You want to put it on the edge to cover both mechanics. There's going to be an in followed by an out. And putting your ley lines on the hitbox here lets you not leave. I'm pulling both triple casts for the wave phase. So I don't know what pattern we're going to get. We end up getting a really, really blessed pattern here. This one's super easy. But again, this is probably the hardest mechanic to dodge. You'd be surprised, because you're probably thinking of the alliance rate and being like, oh, this is a really easy mechanic. But them not having a marker after the first wave, the timing is like really, I don't know, I find it hard to read. And so that's why you'll see I'm always trying to get in the very first move of the wave, because that one does have an indicator. The later ones do not. Oh, I cost myself a swift cast here trying to get Addle up. But that goes back to what I was saying. I was just like, the last thing I want to do is have this randomly kill someone. So I hard cast and clip my GCD. A swift cast to not drop Enochian, and the purpose of that was to make sure that I had my Addle covering that AoE. So this is the thing that we died to, or the other people died to in the run where I was the only one alive. It's just really important here that if the person can solve correctly for their half of the map, but still slightly clip the other side. So it's important to me to go out into the opposite side of the letter as your teammates. That's not exactly what happened when the people died, because the people that died screwed up their own side. But it's just safer, so I recommend doing that. And that's it. Those are all of the... He's just going to do some AoEs here and then eventually enrage. But we still have our limit break, and we still have some stuff here. And my pot would be back up if I had actually potted during the opener. So I could pot here too if I was worried about damage. But we ended up doing just fine. We have 30 seconds to go on the dungeon enrage. And we're all set. Yeah, the only thing I guess I would mention is that you'll notice, because I didn't talk about the time, that we actually waited on cooldowns before pulling this boss. As long as the boss enrage is shorter than the dungeon enrage, there's no real reason to pull. So for that reason, we wait until 6:30, I think it was, to pull the boss. But yeah, that's it. That's my commentary. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment. Hopefully this is a little more informative. Thank you.